You're listening in on an animated discussion about Superman the Animated Series with two experts in their fields. I'm Joshua Unruh, superhero scholar.
And I'm Caleb Masters, your friendly neighborhood film critic extraordinaire from thecinematropolis.com. And today's topic is Target. Target. I think that, Joshua, Superman the Animated Series might have a hard time figuring out what its target is when it's talking about the media. So are journalists good? Are the media bad? Media good? The journalists bad? I'm very confused. What's going on here? The target is very unclear.
It is really interesting how this story comes so quickly on the heels of Livewire, but also with a little bit more distance. We come off of the episode that really focused on Dan Turpin, so this episode does seem to take a very different line on a couple of major American institutions compared to previous episodes. I mean, it's an episodic television show that's written by a room of probably 24 people, so I don't know that we should be that surprised, but it is interesting to look at how this episode changes its tune on journalism and cops compared to previous takes.
That's not to say this isn't an amazing episode, but what I will say is the messaging was so confused. But hey, it is very targeted in its use of multiple genre tropes, particularly like the whodunit murder mystery type thing. So hey,
oh yeah,
I can take it. I can take it good and bad.
I'll tell you, that's actually a thing we should say as a bonus to this show. Like, even if the messaging on some of these institutional ideas is a little muddy over the course of the series, you can at least say that they are very, very focused and consistent within the episode, right? We may disagree with the episode's view of Dan Turpin, but it never wavers in its view of Dan Turpin. We may disagree about the view of media as a whole in Livewire, but definitely Leslie, and then when she becomes Livewire, upholds the themes of that episode. And we have to admit that they are at least right about certain parts of the media. And then we flip to this, and it's just sort of like the bright, shining example of journalism with the dark underbelly of policing. It just flips the flop, but at least it upholds very well the themes and tropes of this episode. So yeah, really, I really like it. Like, this sounds like we're complaining, so we should get ahead of the game and say Target's a good episode, I think.
It's a really good episode. It's like one of those sleepers, you at least for me, I never really thought about it after seeing it 20 odd years ago or something. But then I'm watching, I'm like, holy cow. In the same way we talked about earlier when we were looking at Batman the Animated Series, the original run, how that they would often crib from different genres, particularly like detective stories or hard-boiled detective stories. Mm-hmm, this one is definitely cribbing pretty heavily from certain genre tropes here as well. So it actually kind of felt like a nice, I don't want to say return to form, but we've seen them do this before, just not in Superman in this way, at least not this precisely. So very big fan of the genre tropiness of this episode overall.
One thing that I wind up talking about a lot in my, broader superhero scholarship is that for reasons that are kind of exterior to the character, Batman sort of accidentally becomes this incredibly adaptive character form, right? Like, he starts out as the Shadow with barely any serial numbers filed off. Then we introduce Robin, and it becomes, to some extent, a father-son and coming-of-age story. The 50s happen, and he's not allowed to really fight crime in the way that he did in the 30s and 40s, and he becomes a science fiction guy. Then he becomes very much a pop art icon in the 60s. Then we return to the Dark Knight stuff, and then we get to kind of the loner psychopath stuff in the 80s. And I say all that to say, when they do that on New Batman Adventures or Batman the Animated Series, it doesn't surprise me, right? Like, this is a kind of thing that Batman has been doing by accident or by design, largely by accident, since the 50s, really. With Superman, I'm not going to say that he has not had the same kind of ebbs and flows in his overall publishing history, but I feel like as a character, he's not treated like an adaptable character form in the way that Batman is. So I think it's really, really cool to see these guys kind of bring what we might usually consider a more BTAS storytelling aesthetic over to the Superman show and make it work, you know?
Well, yeah, no, I agree. And you want to know, at least this is just me throwing this out there, that just maybe it's a little devil's advocating, but I don't think that the way they're able to pull it off is not using Superman. It's by using Lois Lane.
No, that's exactly right. I think that is the biggest deal. Now, we are going to see a very noir episode, like an expressly over the top, like voiceover in black and white, take on noir that does utilize Clark Kent and Superman. That is coming down the pipe. But it's interesting to see them experiment with that here. And I think I agree with them that, at least on the surface, like unless you're going to do some really deep thinking about how to do it, the way to do a more, noir or hard-boiled story on Superman is to sideline Superman to a certain extent. And so they do that here by focusing on Lois Lane. When we see the other much more, heart on its sleeve noir one, it will focus on Clark Kent, very much focusing on Clark Kent instead of Superman. So yeah, I think that's key. I think especially when you get to the ways that Lois is put in danger in this episode, you have to sideline Superman, right? But at the same time, it kind of accidentally puts a spotlight on Superman. So we'll talk about that more in a minute, because I don't want to forget that we talk about the one new character design that we have in this episode, because they pretty much nail it. Bowman. Right?
Oh my God. I forgot Bowman existed, Joshua. Thank you for the reminder. We did have a new design. I was like, wait a second. Who was it again? Oh, Bowman. Very important one, actually. And he looks great.
Yeah, he's really important to this episode, first of all. But they also, I just think they kill it. At the end of the day, they just create the apotheosis of scumbag cop in this. Like, Bowman seems to be more of a scumbag cop to me than Bullock ever did on Batman, and that's 100% what Bullock's job is over there.
Yeah, exactly. No, this guy is, and maybe it's because the context is a little different. Maybe when you're thinking about a crooked cop in Metropolis, it just feels a little more wrong than the Bullock. Because here's the thing about Bullock being the crooked cop, you at least think that sometimes he might have decent intentions sometimes. This guy though, from jump, you're like, oh, this guy is totally his intentions are not good. He is crooked as they come, and he's looking to like, really abuse his power.
And we even get, some more subtle, relatively subtle for this show, ways of making him a bad guy. Like, he's clearly just on the label sexist, at least. And possibly as far as misogyny. Like it's difficult to know whether he is dismissing Lois because she is a woman or because she outed a bunch of other cops as being corrupt, which asterisk probably means she almost outed Bowman as corrupt, because he's not a good dude, clearly. It's great. He is a very sort of subtle, comparatively subtle character design. But if you're going to make a scumbag cop, they absolutely did it. He's got that kind of like 60s noir look to him. The voice acting is perfect. You love to hate him.
You love to hate him is a good way to put it. And Joshua, from there though, I actually want to just jump off by saying, like, I really like the way this episode sets up. In a classic whodunit story, anyone could be the one trying to kill Lois. They throw like 5 characters at you in the first 5 minutes where you're like, well, this person has reason to want to throw Lois Lane under the bus. No, this person, I thought that was really great, because I genuinely was like, who is out for Lois Lane? Exactly. You know what I mean? I don't know. What did you think that was an effective use of that everyone's a suspect type of story? I
really did. I kind of figured it out about the same time as Lois did, just the way that but more from the way the story was coming together, right? But I'll say that the introduction of all of these extremely likely suspects, or at least you would say equally likely suspects, in a 22-minute episode cartoon, we get all of them done and introduced, and cleverly introduced, like well introduced as people who A, have a reason to hate Lois, and B, might be willing to do something about it. All of them are introduced in probably the first 7 minutes. And you know that because you have all of this space for the actual plot to breathe. All of these elaborate death traps, all of these elaborate shenanigans for Clark to disappear and Superman to save her. We even have time for a thing in this episode that I think is really terrible and I hate, which is this dream sequence. Like, we have so much storytelling economy that we can actually kind of waste a chunk of it on this bad dream sequence and still get a really good episode out of it. It's pretty masterful, honestly.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And I like the ways in which they try to murder her are really fun and clever too. It really does, I think, work especially well. The way they incorporate red herrings at every corner, it's it's a nice 22-minute little whodunit story with Superman featuring Lois. I don't really have a lot more to say about it from that, at least related to the tropiness, but it's very well done. And you're right, there is a lot of space to breathe, but still time for action. So yes, which is a thing we have pointed out this show has not always done well. Like, either something feels a little rushed, or there is room for the action and then the action is not as good as we would like to see. So yeah, it's really, again, considering how off the usual Superman beaten track this episode is, boy, they just really bring it on home as far as I'm concerned. Again, with the small caveat of the dream sequence that I do not like. Joshua, go on. Tell me, why don't you like the dream sequence?
Okay, all right. Well, so broadly, it's worth me saying I don't like dream sequences. I think that a lot of times they are either kind of ham-fisted poetry, like the show or movie or whatever is trying to convince you that something deep is happening when instead it's mostly nonsensical. Or they get used as more interesting, or at least slightly more interesting info dumps, right? Like they're just telling you things or having the character realize things in a more interesting way than just more dialogue. So I just feel, again, they're just a little cheaty. I don't like them. And in this one specifically, where we already have so many well done red herrings, that I feel like this entire dream sequence that actually goes the distance, or as close to the distance as a show like this can go, with seeing Lois die at the halfway mark. What are you guys doing? It just seems cheap, and I would say that about most dream sequences in most media, but considering how well put together this episode is, this one really stands out to me personally as a cheap device.
Yeah, and it does make me kind of wonder, like, again, the premise is, you and I have already really kind of gushed on it a little bit. We really like the premise and the way they deploy genre tropes, but maybe they just didn't have enough time and they were trying to figure out how to fill it. I don't know, because it does seem a little out of left field. Like they were just trying to find something else to throw at the audience. But
well, I mean, the fall to darkness is very Alfred Hitchcock. Like, again, a lot of the stuff in the dream sequence makes, sort of genre sense for the kind of show that they're doing. It's just as a scene, I'm like, what was it that you guys wanted to do here?
Right.
And if the answer is just fake out the audience real hard, I'm not impressed,
Right. No,
and again, it stands out
that.
because the episode is otherwise so good. I want to keep hitting that. This is not just me hating everything. It stands out as cheap because the rest of the episode is so well done.
Absolutely. And, I think that's going to, the other thing I really want to hit on here is we're seeing an investigative journalist in action. This is Lois Lane at her, prime, man. She is walking into LexCorp uninvited, which is kind of crazy. I mean, yes. They're placing bombs on her helicopters, but you know what? She's not going to take that fear mongering. the bomb on the helicopter. No, she's going to pursue the truth by all means necessary. And I really, really appreciate this take. I really like stories about journalists who are just being journalists. And when I say journalist, I should specify for the audience, we do not think that Livewire was a journalist per se, as much as she was a talking head, versus Lois Lane here, who is actually like doing the work, doing the digging, doing the research, doing the interviews, trying to pursue truth for the sake of truth. And I think that's great. I am a big sucker for stories about journalists doing that sort of thing. So I outside of just all the tropiness, I just found it to be a really compelling episode. But as we noted at the top, it definitely seems to conflict with, speaking of Livewire, how the Livewire was like, yeah, media is bad. Who writes for the media? Journalists. But this episode, journalism good. I'm so confused. I'm conflicted. And I do think it's interesting. I don't know, and I think to Josh's point earlier, there's a lot of writers in that writer's room. They all have different opinions and worldviews, so I'm sure that's a part of it. But it is interesting for these two episodes to come out so closely together, for you to be like, wait, so am I supposed to hate the media but love the journalist career field? I don't know.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, institutionally, it's a little bit of a mixed bag. But yeah, the focus on Lois is so good because in addition to what you're talking about, where we see her basically investigating her own attempted murder herself, in addition to that, what I really appreciated is that part of the setup for this episode is actually kind of learning about her investigative journalism by looking at the negative space, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And what I mean by that in this case is, all of these people hate her and want her dead potentially because of her investigative journalism. Like,
yes,
she has been working so hard and so long at this job in Metropolis that this is just a handful of the enemies that she has made along the way. Like, I know we're supposed to think maybe for at least a few minutes, we're supposed to think Lex is one of the possible, attempted murderers. But what's fascinating to me is he's the least likely on the list.
100%.
Like if it's a top 5 list, he's like number 5. I never really thought that they're doing that because it's great to do red herrings of different levels and significance, right? Like that's the thing. We don't know who's who because we're sitting there going, man, I'm pretty sure it's not Lex, but
Lex would be too obvious. If he was going to have done this, he would have done it in a different episode. But that said, whenever you kind of like have to frame it up like the everyone's a suspect, you have to at least consider Lex, right?
Right, because they have a failed romance. She has exposed multiple LexCorp wrongdoings just since this show started, let alone the years that she was working in Metropolis before, Clark gets there and we start paying attention. I just really appreciate even her colleagues, right? We've got a colleague there who's jealous of her success, who's clearly like an older guy. So I feel like he's, he was probably the Lois of his day when he was in his, his actual 30s and 40s or something. And now he's maybe a little bit past his prime. And I mean, it's just getting to see her work as an investigative journalist, fantastic, but more or less a thing I would expect from an action show, right? That's how we get into more trouble. But again, kind of that masterful introduction of all these possible murderers is also the introduction of just how good Lois is at her job, because look at how many people want to kill her, which is awesome.
No, it's fantastic. And that's why I'm saying, like, at the end of the day, like, yes, Superman is obviously a part of this episode, but this is really Lois's episode. And to show that how much of a tour de force she is and what does her job actually look like and why does she create so many enemies? Well, apparently when you're digging up the truth, people really don't tend to like that very much. So anyway, yeah, I am all on the pro journalist train. I'm all on the pro Lois train. I will say, Joshua, we do have to talk about the reveal, though. I mean, this is a very important part of the whodunit stories that I feel like a lot of them actually fail at. Whodunit? I just want to get your take here. What did you think of the reveal of who was trying to kill Lois?
So like I said, I kind of figured it out when Lois started to figure it out. Not because I'm super clever, but because I was kind of going, I had written down how much I loved the elaborate death traps, right? But the longer the episode went, the more I was like, well, Lex could do this, but I'm not sure he would do it this way. This seems beyond Bowman's capabilities. This seems beyond her colleagues' capability. The elaborateness of the death traps started to kind of point in the right direction, which you can either see as giving away the game or you can see as actually good writing, like we red herring until it's time to discover who it really is. And again, A++ for Lois. She's the one who actually figures it out. She figures it out with detective style stuff. Like her putting disparate facts together to figure out who it is some Batman type stuff. I really like it. Big fan. I do think they basically nail the reveal. What do you think?
I do think overall they nailed it pretty well. And I think this just speaks to, I think the reveal would have been way more compelling back in the 90s. I feel like the trope of the incel neckbeard who is friendly with you, has been done a million times. But
it's been done a million times on these two shows. We have pointed this out multiple times on these two shows, and not just going way back like Mad Hatter. Recently, we have done this with Firefly. It is happening a lot. And this is a better example. I mean, as far as the story being told, but you're not wrong. The whole why won't you just notice me? Okay, I guess I'll kill you is legitimately, I don't want to say that it would be, I mean, it's pretty chilling if you take the time to think about it in the 90s, but I think we probably weren't, right? That's what you're getting at. Now we're thinking about it, and it really gives it an additional layer of sinister.
Yeah, it's a twofold, because on one hand, I think that motive just in general we'd seen it less just in general back in the 90s. So there's that. So I feel like, that's just a generally more surprising thing because we hadn't seen it in all sorts of other media. But like as you point out, we had just seen this on the show recently. So I'm like, maybe it was just a common thing that was just people were talking about in the 90s that worked a little better. It just it's not that it doesn't work. It's just like you said, it feels very familiar and kind of lazy. That said, I think the actual execution is very good. Just the motives feel a little like recycled.
Yeah, it's interesting that you can look at the same creative team, even if it's a big creative team, right? And that sometimes your 4:30 on a Friday, let's just get it out the door kind of scripts, like Firefly, for instance, can accidentally undermine your better stuff when, sort of the themes are a little too similar and one does them really badly and you see that one first and then you see the other one done really well, but you're like, yeah, but it's kind of
bad taste in your mouth though. You know, you're like, okay, well, you guys already took your swing at talking about this and you didn't do good. So stop trying to make it better.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I feel like there's one other big thing that I want to hit from this episode that I know I love, because there is some red hot secret identity shenanigans going on with Clark.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Clark and Superman pretty sidelined in this episode, as they should be. But when they're around, the secret identity shenanigans are red hot. I love them. What did you think about all that?
Well, I mean, Joshua, anytime we can get the Lois and Clark secret identity shenanigans, I'm always game for it. I think this show actually, we don't talk about it a lot, but the Lois and Clark dynamic gets down really well. It's pretty subtle. But anyway, yes. So I found
you're right. You're right. Okay, hold on. I really want to go down that cul-de-sac for a minute, because you are absolutely right. Around this time on live action television, we had a show called Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman, which was seriously 85 or 90% Lois and Clark and not Superman, right? Mm-hmm. And obviously this is a kids action show. It's got to be more Superman focused, but just to show you how much that dynamic can work, I loved that live action show, very 90s. I'm not sure that it would actually hold up, but it really worked at the time. And you're right about how subtle it is, because nobody stands around and calls out how well Lois and Clark work together, but they really do complement one another as colleagues. It's tremendous.
Right, and even it's like, and whenever the secret identity shenanigans come up. It's just like a nice fun wink or something, or Clark always has the lamest excuses for not being around. Anyway, I wanted to call it out because it doesn't get spotlighted enough. We haven't really talked about it a ton on the show, but just how well it works, and you sort of like it works so well you almost don't notice it because you expect it, if that makes sense.
Yes.
But I mean, this is anytime we can call out how well that's doing. I think this episode, because Lois was the focus, it was really, really front and center.
And I will say, one thing I like about Clark's lame excuses is that they kind of ramp up and get significantly less lame as the episode goes on. Like at the beginning, he's like literally just pouring coffee in his lap, Oh, yeah. And then midway through, he's accidentally on purpose half saving Lois and then throwing himself off a bridge so that Superman can air quotes save him. I mean, look, he's walking around in a sling the entire episode. He just goes hard for it. And again, I really like that because I feel like these elaborate death traps would be broadly more at home on Batman, right?
Oh, yeah.
Superman, if these were elaborate death traps on Clark and he were alone, he would just walk through them. It would be no problem. But the fact that it's focused on Lois and that he has to do this other stuff in order to swing around to save her is pretty great. And as a nod to Lois, the journalist, she kind of picks up on it at the end, at least on the Superman side. Oh,
totally.
Yeah. Are you watching out for me? It's adorable.
I don't have a lot more to add there, Joshua, but what I will say, I'll just end from my piece on this note. And I think we've even said this before, but it's never been more evident than this episode that Lois must pay a fortune in insurance. I really hope the planet is paying her very well. Every other episode, she's getting her car just wasted.
Yeah, honestly, I would be in Perry's office being like, listen, the planet has got to help out with this. I am in danger constantly, and it's because of my job. Come on. Where's my allowance? Where's my stipend just for car insurance?
Oh, that's a good one. Like how sometimes like news anchors get stipended for their suits. For Lois Lane, you stipend her cars.
Her car insurance, yeah, because it's all over the place. She loses cars faster than the Bat family loses Batmobiles, and that is saying something.
You want this Pulitzer Prize winning journalist? Well, you got to buy me a car once a week or so.
Absolutely. Very good. All right, so clearly we are big fans of Target. We like it a lot. We've probably tipped our hand a little bit with what our alternate media recommendations are going to be like. But Caleb, tell me, if someone is enjoying Target as much as we did, what do you think they should be reading, watching, playing, or experiencing?
Well, Joshua, I had one, but I came up with another one sort of as we were discussing the show with the pro-journalist things. But I'm going to start with the whodunnit story. And listeners out there, if you don't know this already, I'm a big Rian Johnson fan, so take this all with a grain of salt. But Rian Johnson's whodunnit, Knives Out, starring Daniel Craig and a huge, crazy, amazing ensemble cast. This movie is so much freaking fun. The actors are all just chewing the scenery. The writing is really fun. The mystery is sort of like it kind of throws you for a loop for a few times, and it just is like that whole larger than life, like Agatha Christie vibe to it. If you really enjoy that aspect of this episode, you absolutely should check out Knives Out from Rian Johnson. I believe it's currently streaming on Amazon Prime.
Can confirm. My house has taken advantage of that more than once already.
Yes, check it out. And good news, recent news broke that there's going to be 2 more sequels coming on Netflix. So it's, Knives Out. It's a great place to watch, a great thing to watch if you enjoyed this episode. The other recommendation I have is actually the movie Spotlight. And I can't recall if I have called that out on an animated discussion before, but it is a movie about journalists investigating the... I guess it was, what would you say? It's the priest molesting, like the widespread molestation of boys from priests in the Boston Globe back in I think it's 2001. So basically the whole movie is about them like pursuing this story and like what it takes to get this story published. Not only, oh my gosh, we found out the truth, it's how do we publish this in a way that is actually going to that we can verify and is legal and all this stuff. Anyway, it's a really great movie exploring just how hard real journalism is and how important it is. So check that out. Spotlight. It's a great watch. Joshua, what about your alternate media recommendations?
Okay, so as discussed many times, hard-boiled detectives and noir in general are big focuses for me. I mean, like, if not on this podcast, on other podcasts, I have mentioned how discovering Raymond Chandler when I was about 13 or 14 years old literally changed my whole life. Which made suggesting something for this a little difficult because I didn't want to go to my usual wells. I wanted to draw new water for our listeners. So I am going to recommend Robert Altman's 1973 take on hard-boiled detectives, The Long Goodbye.
Oh my gosh, this is perfect.
It is so weird in a great way because it's pretty clear that Elliot Gould as Philip Marlowe and Robert Altman as the director are very invested in telling a 70s LA version of one of Raymond Chandler's 1930s LA stories. But the LA of the 1930s and the LA of the 1970s is so vastly different. Like there's lots of things overlapping, like this sort of seedy underbelly of the whole thing. But the reasons that there's a seedy underbelly and the way that manifests are so different between the 30s and the 70s that while you can tell Altman really is taking the storytelling seriously, he's also kind of coming at it at a really oblique angle, Like I could almost believe that this is a man who loves hard-boiled detective stories, but just honestly felt like he couldn't make one and so decided to make one that's very much his own. So I feel like if you love hard-boiled detectives, if you like watching detective movies, especially if you like ones that are really wearing that hard-boiled influence from the 30s pulps on their sleeve, but you want to see it done in a very sort of unexpected way, I don't think I could recommend something more than The Long Goodbye.
Joshua, I love that recommendation. Anytime we can talk Robert Altman, we are in good company. Great recommend.
That about wraps it up for this animated discussion. If you enjoyed this conversation and would like to join in, come find us on Twitter. Caleb's at CMastersTalk and I'm at Joshua Unruh, and the hashtag is animated discussion. Caleb, where else can people find you?
Well, I'm the editor-in-chief and a contributor at the Cinemetropolis, a website that specializes in in-depth film critique and analysis. We also have our podcast, The Cinematic Schematic. We are wrapping up our special interview series, 3 films that got you through the 2020 pandemic, where I'm speaking with a variety of different folks working in different aspects of the film industry, at least here in Oklahoma, to hear exactly about how the pandemic impacted that line of work. We also publish in-depth essays on all types of films. You can find the podcast and those articles right on over at thecinemetropolis.com.
Remember that an animated discussion is a Pulp Diction Productions program and is 100% supported by listeners like you. To find out how you can keep this and our other shows in production, check out patreon.com/pulpdictionproductions. Show your support by pledging at Patreon or by leaving a great review on Apple Podcasts to make it easier for more people to find us and join in the discussion.
And of course, the links to Patreon, Apple Podcasts, our recommendations, and Twitter are all very easy to find in the show notes. Thanks so much for joining us for this animated discussion. We'll be back next time to talk about the new Batman Adventures episode, Critters.
Until next time, look! Up in the sky! It's a bird! It's a plane! It's an animated discussion!